97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
My personality is I want to win badly. I want to win more Lombardis for Philadelphia and our fans. We got the greatest fans around, and I will do everything possible.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher's in for Adam Kaplan today, and you can check out the Inside the Birds podcast on any podcasting platform on their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Mosher is here. He broke down some film. We're going to talk about what he saw from a couple of different aspects here on a Sports Bash Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff Mosher, everybody. What's up, buddy?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? Good to talk to you 2 days in a row.
I like it. Like the old days here. Mosher Monday. Geoff Mosher is back. Let's dive into some of the things, though, that maybe you didn't see yesterday that you got a chance to watch on tape and now have seen. Let's start with the Eagles' pass rush. Let's go to defense here and start on that side of the ball. This is supposed to be their bread and butter. This is supposed to be the biggest, fearsome part of that defense. What are we seeing from that Eagles' pass rush on film?
Yeah, Mike, there are certain things in watching the film that I observed that either feed into the perceptions that we had watching the game live or actually go against the perception. One of the perceptions we've all had is that, and it's not just perception, not just watching, but even the statistic, as we talked about going into the game, tell you is that the Eagles are not generating the same type of pass rush that they did last year. In fact, they went into the game with the fewest third down sacks in the NFL, which is sort of hard to believe given what they're built and what they're built to do and how good they were seemingly earlier in the year at creating pressure. But when I watched this game, it really stuck out to me. And again, you're going up against a level of competition. It's not like their pass rushers are suddenly bad, but for the second straight game, Tyron Smith definitely got the best of Josh Sweat. There's no question about it. Tyron Smith's a Hall of Famer. Josh Sweat, very good guy, a Pro Bowler, but Tyron Smith gets round one and gets round two as far as the one-on-one battle there. On the other side, yes, you saw Hassan Reddick have 2 sacks, and Fletcher Cox obviously got a sack as well, caused the fumble, right, that Jalen Carter returned for the touchdown. But on some very, very key second and longs, third and longs, this was a game where there was a lot of nibble, big play, especially for Dallas. Nibble, big play. That's where I feel the pressure that you normally expect from the Eagles was not there. It wasn't there from the interior. It wasn't there enough from the edges. And so you either saw Dak Prescott have enough time to find, his outlets, or even if the pressure created a little bit of a pinch, Mike, that's when Dak did a really good job of navigating the pocket, making second reaction plays he hasn't been doing, say, the last 2 years. I think this year more than in the past, maybe since before his ankle injury, the gruesome one, he's making second reaction plays. But that's also a part of the pass rush not hitting home. We know that Jalen Hurts makes a lot of second reaction plays, but we've seen him get sacked or stuck in the pocket or not know what to do. The Eagles pass rush, it's just so different. When you watch Dallas's pass rush in this game with Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, you just see the difference. It just jumps out at you. Those guys, even when they're not getting sacked, were just driving back the line. They're creating pressure. They're making it difficult. And I don't think the Eagles' defensive line did that nearly enough against Dak Prescott and the offensive line.
All right, Mose, great breakdown. So how is that affecting them in an area where they really struggle, which is on third down?
Yeah, I mean, some of the bigger plays, especially in the first half, as the Cowboys built up that lead, came on third down. And, you know Sean Desai doesn't want to pressure, too much because the Eagles are not very good in man coverage or against the blitz. I mean, he does play man, but doesn't like to blitz a whole lot. And so what you're relying on is he plays a lot of cover 3 zone, which can be effective. But when you play zone, you've got to get that front 4 pressure hitting home. If not, a good quarterback and a good offensive line protecting that quarterback is going to find the holes in the zone. And then there are some repetitive things we've seen from the Eagles on the back end where they do little things that aren't right. And I'll give you an example on Dallas' second drive. This is where they get a field goal on the drive to go up 10-0, but there's a 3rd and 9. Now, 3rd and 9, right? You're talking Eagles, 3rd and 9. This is where you feast. Your front four is going to race off the ball. They're going to rush the quarterback. And Dallas was spread. They had no running back and no tight end kept in. That is an empty formation, okay, which means that Dak Prescott has to get the ball out immediately and fast. It's 3rd and 9, though. He's got to throw the ball at least 10 or more yards, which means he needs a little bit of time. He needs the routes to develop. I personally think that's a time when you're showing the side where you got to say, we're sending 6. We're rushing everybody. We might cover 0, maybe cover 1 and send 5 or 6, but we've got to speed up Dak's clock to make him throw it short of the 6. Well, that's not what Sean Desai did. He played a normal cover 3. And in this situation, CeeDee Lamb put a double move on Bradley Roby. He goes to the inside, which is where Roby was playing him. But then Roby tried to jump it, Mike, which was a bad decision. He was doing the right things, funneling him inside to the safety. Once he jumped it, Lamb just switches directions, goes to the outside. And again, Dak had enough time to then hit him for, I believe it was 22, 23 yards. It was, it's a first down on 3rd and 9 that you just can't give up. And there were a couple of plays that I can go through, the 30-yarder against another cover 3 where Brandon Cooks, this is right before halftime, catches a 30-yard pass right down to the 1, set up a touchdown, where there was time and where you could see the lack of dynamic athleticism and speed in the back end is hurt because there's no pass rush and because those guys have to do more.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4. From the Inside the Birds podcast, talking with us here. What about the Eagles' rushing defense? What are you seeing there? Because this was a rushing defense earlier that we essentially said nobody even wants to try running the ball on them. I mean, there were teams that just didn't even try. Minnesota, Tampa Bay. Did they not try because they weren't good at running the ball? Or did they not try because they thought Philadelphia was so good at stopping the run? What has happened to the rush defense?
Well, I'll speak to this game because I know we talked in the past few games about some of the, surprisingly Eagles giving up, some runs that you wouldn't expect. I don't think this is one of those where I think the perception's not as bad as the reality. I actually think that they were pretty good in rushing defense. Now, Dallas ran 2 reverses. Early one with Turpin that got 22 yards. They ran one with Lamb that was well-designed and got just basically good blocking. Sidney Brown and Slay struggled to get off their blocks to make the tackle. So that's 32 yards just on end arounds. There was a particular play early where the Eagles linebackers shot gaps and did everything correctly and forced Pollard to have to kind of reverse and cut back into a different gap, which that's the advantage of Eagles. You're making the running back run laterally, but Byard came down into the box, and his responsibility is to clean up that tackle. And instead of a 2-yard gain, it turned into an 11-yard gain because Byard didn't make the tackle. So there were maybe like 2 or 3 runs where I thought they could have made a tackle and prevented the run from getting bigger than it is. But in general, I don't think you look at this game and say there weren't a whole lot of explosive runs by Pollard or by Rico Dowdle. In fact, I think the average for the Cowboys rushing was 4.3. But like I said, some of that is, the Turpin 22-yard run influenced it. Dowdle 3.8, Prescott 3.7, Pollard 3.7. You'll take that from ball carriers. So I don't think the Eagles' run defense was as bad as it looked. I just think that when you watch a game and you see a few missed tackles here and there, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But this was not a game that was lost because of a bad run defense.
So when you watch this defense, I mean, are we overreacting to this just isn't a good defense? They stink. Or, are they just kind of in a rut right now? Do they have the talent? Are you watching on tape that, hey, there's a lot of fixable things on this defense that maybe we shouldn't hit the panic? Are you watching a defense that you're saying, no, there's not a lot of fixable stuff here, and they don't have the talent?
Well, I do think, and, Quinn, Michael, and Jason Devon did great on this on the Q&A podcast on our Inside the Birds platform today, of really – putting into context that there are mistakes that they're making that are coachable and fixable, but they've been saying that. We've been saying that for 14 weeks now. So why aren't they getting fixed? And that sort of raises the coaching question or the question of, is this back end either too slow or too young in certain spots where even with the coaching, they're just not having a good feel for the moment. And I think Reed Blankenship is a good example of that. The first touchdown that the Cowboys get on their opening drive is Dak breaking contained from the pocket, scrambling to his left as CeeDee Lamb comes across from right to left. And what happens is they're in a cover three. It's a zone. Again, it's a zone. And Blankenship did a good job initially of being there. He's lined up over Ferguson, even though it's a zone. And Ferguson sort of crosses left to right. Now, if you're Reed, you don't cross all the way with Ferguson because you're in a zone. If you're vacating your zone, Dak can either run into it, which he started to do, or the receiver's going to cross into it, which is what Lamb did. Maybe, though, Reed thought it was scramble drill because Dak's running around, right? And maybe he's plastering while everybody else is still on their zone key. Either way, it's a mistake. I don't know that that's a mistake an 8-year safety would make, though. I am sure that when they watch this stuff on tape, at the NovaCare complex, they say, Reed, this is what you have to do. Last week, we saw the same thing with Sidney Brown. He ran all the way with Deebo Samuel in a zone to the other side, to Ben Salem, practically, and left Kittle wide open for that 32-yard catch, right? So is it correctable? Yes. Are they coaching it? I have to think they are. Is it changing? No. And what I think to answer your point would be is that when the Eagles are going to play good teams, when playoff caliber teams, little mistakes in close games like that are going to hurt you, and we are not seeing evidence of the Eagles not making those little mistakes at least 3 or 4 times a game.
Jeff,
and I will say, Mike, I think they played better defensively against the Cowboys and the Niners. I didn't see too many of those busted coverages or bunch routes where they got confused. I just, like I said, Reed makes a wrong move here, somebody else makes a wrong move. It's little stuff that's really adding up.
Well, and I mean, I guess you look at the defense that they played in the game on Sunday and then go back to the time they played Dallas in, week 9 and say, okay, what did their defense do well in week 9 that Dallas adjusted to and caused the game to be the way it was this time around as opposed to the way it went the last time?
Yeah, good question. I almost forget now about the complexion of that game. I just know that, the Eagles scored a lot. See, that's the big thing. The Eagles, I think, are a different team, Mike, when they score early and when they score first, and then they can get their running game more committed because they have a lead. And in this situation, they weren't able to do that because they were behind and they were turning the ball over. That changes the complexion of the game. But if I remember correctly, Dallas moved the ball well in that game as well. I mean, we know they had a chance to win it.
Yep.
We know in the fourth quarter they moved the ball well. There may have been a couple of plays here and there in the first half where the Eagles defense was a little bit better, got a little more rush, but that was similar in that it was 2 good teams going at it, moving the ball. It's just that the Eagles, I think they had a couple of fumbles, but they recovered their own fumbles as far as in terms of giving the ball away like they did to Dallas this time.
Yeah, you look at the defense, and I think a lot of people panic more on that side of the ball, but let's go to the offense. What did you see from Jalen Hurts in the pass game? Some people look at Jalen and wonder, did he play a good game? What did you see from him?
Mike, I thought Jalen Hurts played a much better game than he did against San Francisco. He only had 197 yards, but if you think about all of the drops, right, A.J. Brown dropped such a beautifully thrown ball down the sideline. Devontae Smith drops a pass in the end zone. There was obviously the 2 fumbles, right? I mean, I think he probably, these metrics where they say what your expected total is versus what your total is. He had a 250 type to 300-yard game passing. It's just the numbers weren't there because of drop passes. So I don't kill him that much on that. I mean, he did not put the ball in harm's way with his passes. He did have a fumble, we know, as a runner, but he didn't have too many risky passes. I thought he was decisive. I didn't think he left the pocket as early this time. Trusted his protection a little more, even with that Dallas pass rush. So as a ball thrower, look, Jalen Hurts did a really good job, and he was failed by his weapons on a couple of really big occasions.
All right, so let's bring that up then, because there have been some murmurs. Derek Gunn mentioning the too predictable. Sirianni was asked about it today. Do you think that you watch this passing game? Do you look at a team that does not have enough creativity And are they too predictable in their passing game? Or do you look at it and say, I don't know what the heck these guys are talking about. These guys are open. There are plays to be made. They drop balls. They fumbled. What's going on with the creativity of this offense in your mind?
Yeah, I feel like the answer to both questions is yes. I mean, I think if we're not talking about drops, right, I don't know who wins the game. It's probably it's clearly a very high-scoring game. Dallas may still win. But we're talking about a lot more points, I would think, right? I mean, if the Eagles hold on to the ball, including a touchdown that Devontae Smith, I really thought normally has. It was a tough catch, but it did hit him in the hand. So, you don't want to call it a drop, but the play he normally makes, to be fair. So I don't – the Eagles run these plays. They work. There are guys open enough for them to score points. But by the same token, when I watch their offense, I see the same route concepts. I see players who are good receivers being asked to win against certain coverages, and a lot of times they do. Sometimes they don't. I don't see an offense that to me has great ingenuity to it, but I don't know that it always did, even with Shane Steichen calling it. I just think that when they have the lead and they run the ball, they're able to have a little bit more optionality. You could probably say Shane Steichen did a better job of mixing things up. Everything went right for the Eagles last year. There's certainly never going to be a Shanahan or Sean McVay style offense. They don't use a lot of motion. That's a Nick Sirianni thing, not a Brian Johnson thing. Nick Sirianni has never he's come out and said, I don't really use motion to confuse. Sometimes we do it to get tells, but I don't really need it. We can get tells by our formations. So I don't know if that much has to change. Or is going to change.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, because a lot of people, I feel like the motion stuff, I don't know how you feel about this. We had Colin Thompson on earlier and talked to him about motion and what does that mean for an offense. San Francisco does it, Miami does it, and those are great offenses. So fans say, they do it, you don't, your offense stinks, theirs is good. Is it as simple as that? What does motion mean to those offenses? And if Philly doesn't have the motion, is it a sign that their offense is predictable?
Yeah, I mean, and I actually thought against the Cowboys they probably used a little bit more motion than they ordinarily do. I'll wait to see what the stats come out. But, DeAndre Swift was in motion quite a bit out of the backfield, and there were some plays that they hit on where there was motion. But it's just not a staple of what they do. I mean, I don't think it has to be. If you've got – but it does put a pressure on Howie Roseman to make sure he's got man beaters like Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, sure. But the pressure's there anyway. You want to get good players. You want to have guys who can beat all sorts of coverage, and that's the kind of team that they put together. So if it worked last year, right, again, I do think that it helps to evolve. It helps to do things a little bit differently. But I tend to think that people want now everything to get ripped up and the Eagles to be an entirely new offensive look and just do some crazy design things, saying it's not working when the reality is it's working, but guys got to execute. They got to catch the ball.
All right, Moshe. It's funny because 2 losses back to back like this, you would say these are trends. Are they trends in your mind, or is 2 games not a big enough sample size to start thinking about making some major changes?
Well, the trend is this, that in 70% of the Eagles games this year, they've given up a lot of yards, they've given up points. I mean, you can look at Miami. You can look at Tampa Bay. You can look at the second half against the Rams and say these are really good examples of the Eagles tightening up and buckling down on defense, getting pass rush. But what's that? 10 quarters out of 15 weeks here. So the trend is that they're not going to be very good defensively. But there's also the trend that when they play a team that's not one of the best teams in the NFL, when it's not the 49ers, when it's not the Cowboys, and we'll see when they play the Seahawks this week, that they can dominate for long stretches of the game, especially with the pass rush and especially with what they do offensively. The Seahawks don't have a great offensive line, so I'd be shocked if you and I are talking on Monday and we're saying that Josh Sweat couldn't get the best of Charles Cross. I'd be shocked if we're saying that Hassan Reddick really didn't cause a whole lot of pressures against whoever's playing quarterback for the Seahawks. I think people, again, we see what they saw last, and then that's now 2 weeks in a row. Mm-hmm. But what the Eagles have been all year is a pretty good team. And I still think that you look at them and say they're a top 5 team. Are they a top 2 team? Doesn't look like it right now. But they're a top 5 team and you got a chance. And then if you broaden the lens, right, I mean, you look at Kansas City, you look at Baltimore, you look at Detroit. I mean, every other team's got 2 or 3 losses as well. It's not like the Eagles are suddenly inflicted with some disease where they're not they can't execute anymore. They played 2 really good teams.
Well, they did play 2 really good teams, and, of course, people watch back-to-back and say, well, you lost back-to-back to 2 of the best teams. I guess I want to ask you, I admit that it sounds like an excuse, but the way this schedule fell, I don't know that it was very conducive to – and, look, that's an excuse. I mean, the game's on your schedule. You got to figure out how to get up for it. But playing both teams back-to-back where they had 10 days to prepare for you – this was 4 games in 20 days for Philadelphia. I think when you have 2 teams that are pretty good and you give one team that little bit of an advantage, I think you saw it play out in these 2 games.
It's very possible. I always counter that with saying, and I don't know how many teams do this, but the Eagles, they have Wednesday walkthroughs. They're sipping tea at practice on Wednesday. I don't think every team does that. So they really don't practice until Thursday, right? So that gives them Monday, Tuesday, it gives them 3 days to really get the body fresh, which is probably 1 day longer than the way, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60% of the league does it. Now, you're right. 2 intense, emotional games, and that follows the Kansas City and Buffalo games, which are intense and emotional. So I do think there's an element of, especially on defense, Mike, where they just look a little bit tired, or when things don't go well, it's just the body language is not good, and they need to get their confidence back. And more so than the rest, I just think they need their confidence back. And I think a nice game against the Seahawks and, that offensive line again, if you can dominate it a little bit, just put the surge in the rest of the team.
All right, Moshe, good stuff as always. Football at 4. Check out the Inside the Birds podcast and listen for more Eagles on all podcasting platforms. Geoff Mosher, you're a good man.
You are too, Mike. Good talking to you.
All right, Geoff Mosher, everybody, from Inside the Birds podcast, which you can find on any podcasting platform or on their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds.